Hi, everybody, and welcome. I'm Leslie with the New Mexico Small Business Development Center, and I'm here with Eric Spellmann. He already told me this is going to be a good one, so I want to remind everyone to type your questions in the Q&A because he's going to pick them up throughout the entire webinar. He's really good at that. Who's stealing my art? How to detect online picture plagiarism. What the heck, Eric? Let's hear all about it.
I know there's all these picture thieves out there. It's crazy. Oh, Leslie, this has been going on a long time. It really has. I swear, the first time I ever had to deal with this was like 15 years ago. It really was, when the internet wasn't that old. And people started to discover that their stuff was just disappearing and they didn't know what they could do about it. They didn't even know how to know if it was even happening. And they were discovering it by accident. So let's get started because I'm going to give you and all your viewers everything they need to know to find out if any of their pictures are being stolen and then what to do about it if they are. So, like I said, it is rampant. Image plagiarism is everywhere. It is out there. And we're going to be talking about each one of these points I'm about to show you. First, what did they copy exactly? In other words, whoever copied whatever it is you have, exactly what did they copy? Second, what was their intent? What were they looking to do with it? Did they cite the image? In other words, did they give it a citation? Did they give credit to who actually owns the image? We're going to talk about the city of Amarillo debacle. Oh my gosh, that was so embarrassing. And what to do about it. But finally, and this is what all of your viewers want to know, Leslie, how do you actually find out if it's happening? And I'll be doing some live Googling on this. So be ready, people. This could get a little crazy. Whenever you do a live internet presentation, you never know what might just hit the screen. So cross your fingers. First, what did they copy? Exactly. I know that may sound like it's not that big a deal or it's such an obvious question that you don't even need the answer, but let's talk about that for a second. We also call this content scraping. In other words, someone will go out there and they will copy either the text, maybe a blog you wrote, they'll copy that, and they will copy a picture or a piece of art or something that you've done. They scraped the content. Technically, Google already does that, and every search engine does that, whether you know it or not. Is they have these little bots that will go out there and basically copy everything on your website, but they don't copy it to make money on it. They don't copy it to misrepresent it. They copy it so that people can find it. In other words, when people do a search, usually text search, Google doesn't copy images that much. But when people do a search, it makes it easy for Google to find the right website for them because Google actually has a copy of the text that was on that web page. So just know that if you ever wanted to Google this subject, it's also called content scraping. Now, one of the things you need to realize is that sometimes content scraping is not as black and white as you think. In other words, you need to realize that every single graphic, on the internet has a direct address to it. In other words, a www. blah, 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 / ends in like .jpg or png or whatever. In other words, it has a direct Google address. So one of the legal questions that always comes up is, if all I do is point to the graphic on your website, did I really take it? In other words, I didn't copy the image from your website and save it to my computer at all. All I did was maybe on my website, I linked to your graphic. In other words, your graphic is still on your website, but in the link I put on my website, it actually pulls your graphic. Now, there used to be a big legal gray area about all of that because technically you're not copying the graphic. Technically, you're not stealing it. You're just referencing it. And so the big legal thing was, what is a web address? All you're doing is pointing somewhere. That's all it is. I remember there was one time a company came to me and they said, Eric, there is a porn site that is actually linking to us. That's right. A porn site had a link on their website that was pointing to one of my customers' websites. And their website, my customer's website, had nothing to do with that. Nothing at all. But this porn site had made a link. And the customer asked me, is there any way to get this porn site to remove the link to us? Nope. And that's because the porn site didn't do anything wrong. You see, you don't need permission to put a link on your website to any other website. Hear me on this. You don't need permission to link to anything, any other website. Like I could put a link to Coca-Cola on my website and Coca-Cola couldn't do anything about it. Because really, I didn't copy their content. I just made a way for people to click and go to Coca-Cola's website. So it's kind of the same thing with a graphic. You know, if I find if you have a piece of art on your website, if I can find the direct address just to that piece of art, and then I put that address on my website where your piece of art now shows up on my website, technically your piece of art I never copied it. You follow me? And so it gets a little weird and it gets a little gray. Now, in that particular case, can there still be things done? Of course, because you're misrepresenting it. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. But just understand the difference between actually copying an image and copying an address to an image. That's all I'm trying to show you here. Also, did they change it? In other words, did they take the image and change it? I remember one time, one of my customers, their logo was stolen, their actual logo, and it was copied, and all they did was change a name on it. And of course, the big question was, the legal question was, can you get them to stop? Because obviously they copied the logo. It was so obvious, the graphic part. The text was different, but the graphic was exactly the same. Well, I'll get to why we couldn't do anything on that one in just a second. But did they change anything? Did they recolor it? Did they make it bigger? Did they make it smaller? You know, and how much change can you make before something is considered a copy of something? How much would you have to change it for it to be a new thing? Back in the old days, people thought that, you know, simply changing the color even slightly of something would make it a new creation. Therefore, no one could come after them legally. That's no longer true. Really, the legal goes back to, can someone misconstrue? Can someone mistaken that graphic for yours? And usually a judge will say yes. So it's not, that's why I tell people all the time, please don't copy anything. Please, 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 please don't just grab stuff off the internet and put it on your own website. You will be in so much trouble. Okay, so what was their intent? If you do find a copy of something you made, why did they do it? What were they trying to do? Now, some of y'all are going, it doesn't matter. I'm going to go after them. But why did they do it? Because believe it or not, that does make a difference. First of all, are they representing it as their own? In other words, are they claiming to be the author of it? I've actually had that happen to me, where I wrote a blog and someone actually copied it and put their authorship on the blog. In other words, they claimed they wrote it. Oh, I went after them in a heartbeat. And I won. And so that's one of the things you got to figure out. Did you get the credit or did they? And so if you're an artist, that's also one of the things you could run into, or a photographer even. You know, if you suddenly find one of your pictures out there, but someone else is claiming to be the photographer of that picture, yeah, are they representing it as their own? Yeah, you can go after them. But here's where it gets a little gray. Is it a student paper or are they reporters? So for instance, if your local TV affiliate does a story on, say, Amazon, can they use the Amazon logo in the story? Of course. Okay, it's called fair use. In other words, they're not trying to make money off of it. They're not claiming it as their own, but they are representing it. Or they're not owning it, but they are referencing it, is what I meant to say. Also, students, if they're going to write a report on something, do they have to go and get permission from all these places? No. It goes back to intent. What were they trying to do? You know, if I take a picture of the Mona Lisa, if I was doing a study on the Mona Lisa, you know, a student paper, turning it in my teacher, could I put a picture of the Mona Lisa in my paper? Of course. Okay. So it depends on what you're trying to do. You know, if you're trying to profit off of it. Now, if I was going to sell that paper to someone, then yeah, we could run into issues. But there's ways around that as well. You know, or are they misrepresenting it? You know, are they claiming it as something that it is not? You know, is someone taking a picture or a piece of art, something you did, and misrepresenting it? In other words, I actually had one situation where someone was actually grabbing content scraping from local artists here in the Amarillo area and creating like a little online museum. But the pictures were awful. They were kind of low res and kind of had jaggies in it. You know what I'm saying? Weren't real clear. And in one case, the artist was actually going to a museum and taking photographs of the artworks and then posting those photographs online. And so the photographs weren't that good. This person was not a good photographer. And so the pictures look bad. And so that's not how the artist would want their works being represented. So those pieces were misrepresented. And yes, the artist was looking to make money, or not the artist, the person taking those photos, this online museum, was looking to make money on all of this. And so, yeah, it got shut down really quick. So you need to ask, you know, is it being misrepresented? Is your piece being misrepresented? They may be giving you credit, but if the quality of the image is so bad that it actually hurts your reputation, then yeah, you're being misrepresented. And are they receiving value from the image? Like that online museum guy, yeah, he was receiving value because he was selling ads on his website. And so he was receiving cash for being a place where you could see all of Amarillo's local artists. Now, what should he have done? He should have contacted each artist individually and got permission to use that art, and also only used images that were submitted by the artist. In other words, don't just go and take pictures of this art and throw it on a website and claiming, well, because I took the picture, it's mine. No, that's not how things work. And so he should have got permission first if he was going to do something like that. And I'll be honest, if he's making money off of this, if he's making bank off of this, then there should be some sort of compensation back to the artist of some kind, an agreed upon compensation. Were they using your image to disparage you? So for instance, if someone wanted to give you a bad review, and so they took your company's logo and put it in the review and called you every name in the book, and you know, just totally just tore you down in your company, could you go after them for using your logo? Of course. Now, if they don't use your logo, but they reference your name, that's totally legal, you know. And people ask me all the time, well, Eric, but what if someone lies about my company in their review? Can I go after them? Well, you can try, but you're not going to get Google to take them down. It just depends on who's willing to pay the most for a lawyer. We'll talk a little bit about what you can do about it in a second. But if they are disparaging you, if they are taking like for instance, let's say you're an artist and they take one of your images from your website and they post it and they say, this is the ugliest thing I've ever seen in my life. I would never buy this at all. Then yeah, you can go after them. Did they cite the image? Now, we all learned this back in school, people. Remember when you would get information from, yeah, this will date me, from an encyclopedia, or you went to the library and you found some reference works, and you were taught that when you reference something, you're supposed to give a citation. You're supposed to give credit to someone else. And usually that would go in either footnotes or endnotes. Now remember those? Now what a pain they were to set up. Well, that's kind of what we're talking about here with images on a website. If you're going to use images on a website that aren't yours, then you need to give credit for where they came from. A good example of this is Wikipedia. Wikipedia is like an online, a big nonprofit online encyclopedia. And every image on there, every single one, if you look closely, has a citation back to the owner of the image. Okay. And that's how they get away with it, because they're not trying to make money on the image. They are simply showing the image. Sometimes you will also see the words used with permission, but that doesn't give you the ability to just go write used with permission under every image on your website. You don't get to do that, people. If you're going to say used with permission, then you actually better have permission, and it better be in writing. I mean that. You got to cover your butt. And that means you need to document the permission that you got to use that image. And you need to be able to pull that in a heartbeat, even if it's just an email. I'm serious. If you're going to use an image, at least send an email out saying, hey, can I use this image on my website? Here's what I'm going to be doing with it, what I'm going to be saying, and I'll give you full credit and a link back to your website. And they go, oh, yeah, that's fine. Then you hold on to that email. You might even print it out, put it in a file. That way, if that person forgets they gave you permission, you've got documentation. Email would count for that. So if you're going to cite something on the internet, what is the minimum? Basically, it's two things. It's going to be, you're going to say who actually is the owner or the author or the creator or where it came from. But then you're also going to put the direct URL. And this is one of the things that is different from what we learned in school, where we're referencing a book, or we're referencing a movie, or we're referencing something like that, or a magazine article. In this case, we are citing a website. And so you're going to put the full URL of the website pointing to where that image is, and do it. Now, does this mean those people can still tell you to take it down? Of course. Just citing where you got it from, giving credit to who you got it from, does not give you permission to do so. Did you hear me? Just because you gave someone credit does not give you permission to use it. And so I tell people all the time, if you're going to be using someone else's work, you need to, what did I say earlier? Get documented permission, okay? Directly from that author, directly from that artist or photographer. And once they give that to you, you're good to go, okay? Oh, this story, I swear. The city of Amarillo, which is where I live. But this speaks directly to this topic directly. Okay, so a good logo, and I tell people this all the time, a good logo for anybody, whether it's a city or a company or a nonprofit, whatever. A good logo is simple, it's graphic, and it's easy, okay? Well, the city of Amarillo's logo was like a seal. It was awful. It was ugly. No one liked it. It was old as the hills. So the city decided to get a brand new logo to make us look, brand new, futuristic, like more contemporary and not so 1940s. And so the city, instead of having a competition where they invited anyone in the city to submit a logo, they hired one marketing firm to submit some logos. The problem is the city hated every single logo that this marketing firm gave them, every single one. I mean, it was a graphic design firm that had some marketing in it, and every single logo that was submitted was awful, and they didn't like it. So the city of Amarillo got a little upset. But then all of a sudden, there was an intern that worked at the city. I don't even know what department she was in, but there was an intern at the city who said, "Hey guys, what do y'all think about this?" And she submitted this logo. And the mayor loved it. Everyone in the city loved it. They thought it was great. They thought, oh, wow, it's so simple. It's easy. Sunrise implies newness and life and yada, yada, yada. And so they made a big thing about it. And they started painting all their trucks with it and started switching them out. And they even had a big party to celebrate having the new logo. I remember when I heard about it, though, the party was on a weekend. And when I heard that the city was getting a new logo, it was Monday morning, because I have a lot of friends who are graphic artists. I have a lot of friends who are, in the marketing world. And they were upset that the city didn't kind of make it a competition and let everyone kind of submit their ideas. And they were really upset. So I swear to you, this is true. I was upset for my friends. And I looked at that logo and I said, what the heck? Amarillo doesn't even have hills. Okay, we were flat as a pancake. Well, who decided this was a good logo? And my friends could have come up with something better than that, other than some intern in Amarillo, working at the city. But then I looked a little harder and I thought, an intern came up with that? That looks a little too good. So what I did, and like I said, I swear I did this, is I knew some tricks, and I'm about to show them to you. I knew some tricks, and I actually took that logo you see there, and I checked the internet for similar pictures. In fact, I used Google, and I said, Google, find me every picture that is similar to that. And the first picture that Google put up was this. And you will realize that intern plagiarized that company's logo. Now, Emar, it's an Emirate nation. It's actually a petroleum company located in the Middle East. And that is their logo. Now, keep in mind, at this point, I'm the only human being on planet Earth who now knows that image was plagiarized. The new city logo that's being painted on all the trucks, I'm the only one that knows this. So what would have been the right thing for me to do? Because trust me, I did not do it. The right thing would be for me to contact the mayor privately and explain what had happened and let him just deal with it. But is that what Eric Spellmann did? No. Eric Spellmann took these two images and put them side by side, and he posted it publicly on Facebook and wrote a very snarky comment that said, well, at least they could have been original. Can I tell you how this exploded in my face? Can I tell you that it went viral? Can I tell you that it was picked up by news agencies all over the state of Texas, and it embarrassed our fair city? It embarrassed our mayor, who was a friend of mine. And someone actually lost their job over this. I did not realize it would do that. I was just mad for my friends who would have come up with something better. So what the city did was, the first thing they did was they contacted this Middle East company and said, hey, can we still use it? Can we still? And of course they said no. So, and keep in mind, the city had hired a lawyer, a trademark lawyer, who supposedly spent 2 days making sure that no other logo was even similar to this. All I did was a 5-second search. And I could have probably done it in 3. And yeah, it was a big problem. And it made all the news. You can Google Amarillo logo and you'll pull up all the stories. Okay. And it was very embarrassing. And The intern, of course, lost her job. I don't know where she went. She kind of just disappeared. I don't know what the city did, but she kind of just disappeared. So, and you're saying, well, how did you do that, Eric? How did you do that? I'm about to show you. So what do you do about it though? Okay, what do you do about it? When you discover that an image has been taken and one of your images has been copied, what do you do about it? What are your legal rights? The first thing I would do before you hire a lawyer, okay, because the second you hire a lawyer, hello, emptying your wallet. So the first thing I would do is contact the offender. They may not realize they couldn't do that. If, maybe they're just stupid, okay, because that happens. There's a lot of stupid people out there. And so what I would do is just contact whoever did it and say, hey, just want to let you know that image you're using on your website or that image you're putting on social media, that's not yours. That's mine. And I'm really going to need you to take that down now. That's what I would do. Cost you nothing. Okay. And if it was a legitimate mistake, then they'll take it down and everything's good and you didn't pay a lawyer and it's all good. But let's say it doesn't come down. Let's say it kind of stays up there. So the second thing you do is you got to document it. Okay. In other words, you got to prove that they're doing this. So what I recommend is taking screenshots and taking maybe a picture of your computer screen. I know that sounds so low tech, but use your actual phone, pull up their website on your computer screen, take a picture with your phone of the screen, date it, document it, take screenshots, have other people do it, not just you, and store that away. Just have it. Because the next thing you're probably going to do is contact an intellectual property attorney. We call them IP attorneys. And most large cities have them. Their sole job is to protect people's intellectual property. It's like digital assets, something you own, like your logo, but it's not something you can hold in your hand. Intellectual property, but they're called IP attorneys or IP lawyers. I would then take the documentation you have, the screenshots, the pictures of someone using your stuff, and I would take it to that attorney. Now, what the attorney's probably going to do is they're going to send out what's called a takedown. Okay. A takedown demand is a very scary letter that you never want to receive. Oh my gosh. I actually had one of my customers that I had built a website for. And then the customer wanted to update the website themselves. And I said, okay, sure. Problem is, they started uploading pictures that weren't theirs. And all of a sudden, my client, my customer, got hit with a whole bunch of takedown letters from lawyers going, this image you do not have permission to use, take it down immediately, or we will come after you. They're called takedown letters. Okay. If that doesn't do it, because like I said, I've often told people lawyers can justify themselves just by having their name on a letter. Okay. If I write a letter, a lawyer writes a letter, guess who's going to get more attention paid to it? And so a lot of times you can just hire a lawyer just to write a quick little letter saying to take it down. And I'll be honest, in about 80 to 90% of the cases, simply receiving a letter from a lawyer will fix it. Okay. They will shut it down. They will take down your image or whatever. And no one had to go to court or anything. But there are times when you will go to court. And then it's going to get very expensive for you. And you have to decide whether it's worth it. Because if you don't know this about our legal system, it's not based totally on what's right and wrong. It's based on who can afford more lawyers. I know that sounds so cynical, but it's true. Who can stay in the fight longer from a money standpoint. That's why big companies typically win. whether they're right or not, because they can just keep coming after you and they don't care. All they want to do is win. So you may have to decide. I mean, I remember there was one time when a company I was doing business with, their logo, I told you this story, sort of, but I told you the logo was stolen. But the problem is the company that stole the logo is in Canada. See, if they're in the United States, it's really easily. Our laws are very clear on this and what you can and cannot do and what they can and cannot do. But the people who stole this logo lived in Canada. And while that doesn't mean it's impossible to go after them, trust me when I say it gets way more expensive, because now you're having to hire an international lawyer. And Canada is actually one of the easier ones because they cooperate with us. But what if someone in Russia stole your art and put it in their own little museum? I don't care how many lawyers you have here in the United States. You're probably not going to get them to take it down, period. Like I said, some countries have good agreements with us on this and some countries don't. In fact, that's one of the big arguments a lot of people have with China right now, is because there's a lot of copies of American digital assets in China, and our government demands that they be taken down or whatever, and usually nothing happens. Because remember this, folks, look at me, remember, our United States laws only extend to our borders. That's it. Every other country would simply have to agree. They have to agree before anything would happen, okay? We're not one world where one law applies to everybody on the planet, okay? So if the people copying your stuff, I hate to tell you this, but if the people copying your stuff are international, the chances of you getting them to take it down are next to impossible. And in fact, that Canadian company never took it down. And my client was unwilling to keep spending money on trying to get them to do so. And then that brings me to the Getty box. This is a very important subject you need to understand as it relates to plagiarism. And as soon as I tell you about this, I'm going to start showing you how to check. Getty is the largest tracker of picture authors. In other words, a lot of photographers and a lot of artists will store a lot of their archive in the Getty archives, okay, the Getty image archives. And what Getty does is they have these little bots, these little software bots. And what these software bots do is they crawl around the internet, and they're always looking, going across every, kind of like Google, going across every website, looking at every image on every website, and they're comparing all those images to what's in their Getty archive. And if they find an image that matches what's in their Getty archive, then they're going to check to see if that website has permission to be used in it. And if that website does not have permission, you're going to get what we call a Getty letter. And yes, I had like 7 of my customers get those. And it was only the customers who decided they wanted to update the website themselves and they didn't understand the law. And so they were uploading, they were just copying images off the internet, just putting them. But listen, because this gets serious. What a Getty letter says, and pray you never get one. The Getty letter basically says, hey, we have proof that you're using our image without permission. And they actually show it to you in this letter. And it's like a registered letter and comes from a law firm and everything. And you will pay us $10,000. Even if you take it down, you still owe us $10,000. And guess what? Getty gets it. And I had clients who received Getty letters and who had to pay the it's $10,000, by the way, it's $10,000 per image. Can I just tell you that? $10,000 per image. And Getty makes a lot of money on that. Lawyers get about half. So those lawyers are happy as a clam. But Getty makes a lot of money on that. A lot of people think of it as a scam, but technically and legally, Getty is in the right. And so a lot of people register with Getty, all their artwork. I think it's like getty.org. And then Getty will help protect it for you. But just remember, lawyers are always going to get like about half of whatever they collect. So here's what you've all been waiting for. How to actually find, in other words, Eric, during the Amarillo logo thing, how did you do that? How did you find a similar image like that? Well, I have a number of ways. The way I used was images.google.com. Okay. And I'm about to show you, and I'm going to show you each one of these and how they work. Google actually has a way, just like when you type some keywords into Google and it finds all the web pages that talk about that. Well, you can put pictures into Google and it'll show you all the similar pictures. And that's how I did it. Second one is Yandex. This one is going to scare some of you because it's actually a Russian search engine. But I will tell you this, it's the best way to search in internationally for people copying your stuff, even better than Google. But don't download any programs they want you to download or anything like that. Just use them for this. 10i.com is kind of a commercial version of kind of what Google does. And they actually have a very large archive. And I'll be showing you this one too. And finally, Pixie. Pixie is one of my favorites because what they'll do is you sign up with them and then they will go on your website and catalog all your pictures, all your photographs, all your artwork. And then they'll start searching the internet for it. And if they find anyone, Pixie will actually submit takedown orders. So we'll talk about each one. And by the way, if it actually comes to charging money, Pixie has lawyers who will do that. But keep in mind, they're going to get half. Pixies, that's how they make their money a lot of times, is Pixie will get half. So let's go to it. Let's start here. Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is probably one of the biggest brands out there and one of the most recognizable logos out there. Okay. First of all, I want to make sure y'all are all seeing my screen here. And if I go to, say, Google, so let me open up a tab. And let's see, and I go to google.com. When you go to google.com, it looks like you're just at normal Google. But what you probably have never noticed is up in the upper right-hand corner, right here, you will see two little items. One is Gmail, where you can kind of pull up your Google email, but the other one says images. And if you click images, you'll notice it looks the same, except you'll now see the word images here, and you'll see a couple of new icons here. One that looks like a camera and one that looks like a microphone. This is how I did it. One of the easiest ways to do it, I'm going to show you a bunch of ways to do it, is to simply go to your website. So let's say that, Coca-Cola was my website. I want to know, is anyone stealing my logo or using it without permission? So I will, now pay attention, hold down my left mouse button, the one you click with, but I will hold it down on the logo. Hold it down. I will then drag until I get up to the tab where Google was. Then watch what happens. You see that? You see how it changed? Okay. Search by image. Now it says drop image here. Bam. And when I do, look how easy that was. It says, okay, here we go. Now the key here is to scroll down until you see the phrase visually similar images. This is what I did with the city of Amarillo. I click on visually similar images, and what you're looking at is every picture that Google knows about that looks similar to the Coca-Cola logo that I just searched on. So if you scroll down, gosh, please don't let there be porn. That I told you, doing this live is so dangerous. So if you scroll down, you'll start to see, yes, all it is really a whole bunch of Coca-Cola logos, right? So you're looking, you're thinking, okay, everything's good, everything looks good. All of these are fine. Until maybe you get to something that doesn't look quite right. Okay, like this one. What the heck? It's just a red circle. Well, okay. And then look, here's one for Pepsi Cola, but notice it kind of, okay, well, we're still okay with that. So you keep searching, and what I see, that's what I did. You keep going down until you find something. Now, if you do find something, like right here, NBC, the Nigerian bottling company. Okay. I could decide, you know what? That's too similar now. It's kind of not, except for the red circle. But I did find one earlier and now it's not coming up. But it was totally a play on Coca-Cola, but it was something totally different. Oh, here's one. Cameron Coca-Cola. I don't even know what this is, but the Coca-Cola company could come after them and say, hey, you put the word Cameron on Coca-Cola, and you don't have permission to do that. And look, Indonesia, Coca-Cola Amarillo, Indonesia. You see what I'm saying? And so you can go after it. Now that is one way to do the search. The other way to do that search, let me go back, is to click on this camera. So first of all, how did I do that again? I pulled up a website, let's say Amazon. I'll just do Amazon this time. And I'll grab the logo, hold down my left mouse button, drag it, drop it, and I told you, drag it. Oh, they're preventing it from happening. That is one way. But what if you can't do that? The other way is this. Click on the little camera and it says, do you want to do it by URL or do you want to upload an image? Now, what does that mean, URL? I told you that every single graphic out there can be done with a URL. So, an actual web address. So if I go to my website, ericspellmann.com, see, look, there's my logo. If you right click on any graphic, and I mean any graphic, right click on it, you have some options here. And one of them is right here. So notice I can either copy the image and download it, or what's underneath that, copy image address. So I will copy image address, go back to Google. You see where it says paste image URL? I will paste it. What you're looking at is an actual web address, but all it does is point to that logo on my website. So for instance, if I put that up here in the blank, just copy paste it up there, look what it does. It pulls up my logo and that's it. Not my whole website, just the logo. It's a direct way to pull up just one image on any website. And technically, I have not broken the law by doing this. So I can submit that to Google and say, search by image. And so what Google does is it will go out there, and I'm pretty sure no one's going to find anything. And then what do? I go down to visually similar images. And there really aren't that many. Most of them just blue logos. Nothing, no one's really ripping me off on my logo. But the other way I could do it is I could upload an image. So for instance, here, if I click on the little camera again, I can click upload an image, choose file, and if I've already downloaded the image, like in this case, I'm going to do a picture of me. Okay, so a picture of me, and say, is anyone using my picture of me without my permission? I hit open, and then I scroll down, choose visually similar images, and this freaks me out every time, people. Can I just tell you that? This freaks me out, because if you do this with your own picture, this is how you find all the people on the planet who look like you. Ugh, it's creepy. You have doppelgangers out there, people. You really do. So if you take a picture of yourself and tell Google to find similar pictures, I'm telling you, it's creepy. Okay. And it will freak you out. Okay. But I can also find all the people who might be using my exact picture. So that is Google. Those are the 3 ways to use Google to do it. Okay. Either by dragging and dropping, by pasting a link, or by uploading a photo. Those are the ways. Now, another way, and I talked about this earlier, was Yandex. Now, Yandex is the Russian search engine. And just looking at it and looking at all of it, you're going to think it's so sketchy. Trust me. Yes, I know. It looks so sketchy. Whatever you do, do not download anything they want you to download, like programs or anything like that. Just use it as an image search. Okay. So you click on images. And then notice they have a little camera. And you can click on the camera. And I'll select a file. And I'll just do a picture of me. And you will actually get different results than Google is giving you. And it tends to do more of a search on international sites. Okay. And it tends to find more pictures of you. So what I can do is I can look down here on the left. These are all the places that it's finding my picture. And yes, there's my YouTube channel. That's fine. Vivios.net. Ooh, I don't know what that is. Vivios.net, and look at that. Yeah, that appears to be someone who is copying my picture without my permission. Now, is Eric going to freak out? Got to do something about it? No, probably can't do anything because it's a foreign site. But if you look, it'll find everywhere my picture. And this is my official press picture anyway. So I expect to find it in a lot of places. But when you do find it somewhere, like KR clip. Gosh, I hope I didn't just launch a virus. Or, you know, and so it now comes up and it finds some video of me from, and it's from YouTube, but obviously they stole my YouTube video. It's an old video and put it on some site. I'm telling you, this is how you find your stuff. And Yandex, as scary as Yandex is, it will find pictures that Google does not. Now, there's also 10i. 10i, this is all they do. They do reverse image search. And so, for instance, you could upload a picture, and it will simply, I mean, this is what they do. It'll simply find every place that picture is located. And it found 2 places where that exact picture was. And so I can take a look at it. Oh, look, here's one called Study On. And I'm like, studyon.guru, what? So I click on it. Oh, look, it's a Russian site. And you know what? I can't read any of this. But one of the cool things about Chrome or Google is that when Google suddenly realizes that you normally speak English, but now you're on a Russian page, it'll come up and say, hey, do you want Google to automatically translate it? Because right now it's in Russian. No, let's see it in English. And Google will actually translate it on the fly. And what I'm realizing is that this, one of my, what I'm discovering is that someone took my stuff and it is now on a Russian site. And once again, is there anything Eric can do? No, probably not one thing. So that's 10i. Pixie is the last one. Pixie is probably going to be the one that you actually use the most if what you do is that, or if you're a photographer or if you're an artist. The way they work is this. You can either upload every picture that you claim is yours, or if you already have a website that shows off all your pictures, you can simply put the URL or the web address of your website, and Pixie will go out there, and yeah, you have to sign up with them. And the initial sign up is free. Okay. And they'll go out and grab all the pictures off your website, and then they'll start searching the internet for those same pictures. The free one will only do about 500 pictures. Okay. But if you're a well-known photographer, you probably have a lot more than that. Or an artist, you probably have a lot more than that. And so that's when they get into some of their paid stuff. And they have different levels based on how many pictures. And but what makes Pixie a little different is that they can do takedowns. Okay. They actually have a bunch of lawyers. And so their software searches everything. And then if they find an image, they'll say, hey, look, I found this. Do you want to issue a takedown? You simply click yes, and Pixie handles it from there. And they'll go after these people, and they'll demand money. And if they don't get any money, it doesn't cost you anything. But if they get money, they get half, and you get half. It's kind of really interesting. Like right here, take action. And they'll do it globally. That's one of the cool things I like about Pixie, is they'll issue the takedowns like in China and Russia. And it's not just the United States. Now, remember what I told you about people getting nervous about, threats, legal threats from the United States. If they don't live in the United States, they could care less. Okay. But you'd be surprised. A lot of the more forward-thinking countries like Britain, and first world countries, if you will, many times will take these seriously. But Pixie handles everything for you. So those are the main issues. Those are the main ways that I go about it, is those sites. You can go directly to the images by going to images.google.com instead of doing the weird clicks I was showing you. But there's the websites for those. And now, if anyone has any questions, I will entertain them.
While we're waiting for questions, and let me just tell you, Eric, when you're doing that, I get so distracted because I want to click along while you're telling us all the information.
I
So,
know you can't watch me speak and have ADD at the same time.
no, you cannot. And I did chat over that we will be sending everyone a copy of the presentation. I also want to remind everyone that we put it on demand, pre-recorded for a week after the presentation, so you can sign up and revisit. Then after that, we put it on our YouTube channel, which is great because I chatted over the link, and that way you can watch it at your leisure. We did have a question come in the chat. Can you briefly
Let's see, can
review?
you Vara? I don't even know what Vara is. I'm sorry. And then how much do I need to change an image for it not to be a copyright violation? I can answer that question. First of all, don't take an existing image and change it and think you're not in trouble. The more money someone has, they can come after you, even if you think you're fine. And they will just outspend you. So I would always create a brand new image if you can. Also keep in mind that you can sign up for bigstockphoto.com, istockphoto.com. These are sites where they have a lot of images and pictures where for X amount a month, you get the right to use those images on your website. And you actually get documentation that they gave you permission. You don't get to own the pictures, but they give you permission to for a price. And that's the way that most website design firms work, is they have an account with companies like this. So yeah, I would never operate from the standpoint of I'll take someone else's stuff, make changes to it, and then hope it works. Oh, okay, the Visual Artist Rights Act. I'll be honest, I have not looked into that yet. I stay pretty much on the tech side of things. But once again, it's not about fairness, okay? I can't emphasize that enough. This has nothing to do with fairness. This has everything to do with who can afford lawyers. It really does. And I know that doesn't sound right, but that's how this works. Trust me, I've been involved in these things on behalf of my clients. And you'd be surprised how many of my clients had legit cases, but they were unwilling to spend what it would take legally to win. Okay. So yeah, there's laws on the books. And it sounds like Visual Artists' Rights Act is one of them. I'm just saying, I would stay away from making subtle changes and hope that the changes are enough. I wouldn't go down that path at all. Thank you for the question. Any
She
other
did say-
questions?
She did say thank you. We have a couple more minutes for questions. Also, we do have Eric coming up on this week. Phone app, is it right for you? So you might do a brief telling us about that. His webinars are always so informative.
Yeah, a lot of companies, they think, you know what? Everyone on their phones, they have apps, they have apps, they have apps. Should our company create an app? Should our company pay someone to make us an app? You know, for our customers, because everyone uses apps, right? Well, that's what that presentation is going to be about, is how to justify or not whether you should pay someone to make an app for your company. I heard you mention a while back about online office. Will you be doing a class on that? Alternative to everything on your computer. Oh yeah, the cloud. Yeah, online office is like, I think you're talking about Microsoft Office. Go to office365.com. You can pay like $10 a month and be able to download for personal use only. Download the current versions of Word, Excel, PowerPoint, something else on your computer. And as long as you keep paying that $10 a month, you can put it on up to 5 computers. And it's the best way to do it. And it'll update as long as you keep paying your $10 a month. Or they also have online versions where you're not downloading anything. You're using a web version of Word or a web version of Excel. And I do that all the time. And I love the cloud. In fact, I think I've done a cloud presentation, Leslie. They might go back and reference.
I think you have, and I will send a link over on that.
But I'm a big fan of that. Office365.com. And of course, Google has their own and it's free. You know, Google Apps. You can look that up too. So that's kind of what I use also. Any
All
other
right,
questions?
guys, I think that is it for today. If there's not any more other questions, I want to remind you, sign up for the no cost confidential counseling. We're here every step of your business. It's not just a one and done. You can get counseling through every phase of your business. So just to remind everyone, also, we'll see Eric again. You guys have a great rest of your week, and thanks, Eric. See you later.
Bye-bye.
Bye.